Welcome to today's Sharper Angle event, What's New and Next for Content Marketing. I am Paul Maccabee, President of Maccabee Public Relations in Minneapolis, and I'm thrilled to be introducing two content marketing experts. We have Tim Brunelle with us. He is the Director of Content and Production for Land O'Lakes and a former creative director for the agency BBDO in Minneapolis, where he worked on brands such as 3M, Anderson Windows, Hormel Spam, and Jennie-O Turkey. We also have Kevin Hunt, a 10-year veteran of General Mills, where he now serves as Senior Manager of Corporate Content, Channels, and Analytics. Before that, Kevin was Managing Editor for Social Media at Thomson Reuters in Eagan, Minnesota, and an Executive Producer at KSTB TV. And now some quick housekeeping before we start talking about content marketing with Kevin and Tim. First, please take a moment to mute yourselves. By all means, open up your video if you'd like so we can see you, but mute yourselves, you know the drill. We'll be recording today's program, and everybody who is listening to this right now will receive a follow-up email in a couple of days with a link to the recording, and you are free to share it with anyone at your company. If you have questions for our panelists, please submit them into the chat box and we'll share as many as we can in the next 45 minutes with Tim and Kevin. Finally, our agenda, we will spend the first 25 minutes in conversation, followed by Q&A, and then we will wrap it up at about 12:45 or 12:50 so you could grab your lunch. And now, Kevin and Tim, let's do this. Kevin and Tim from General Mills and Land O'Lakes, would you be kind enough to share what your role is at your respective companies and why content marketing is important to Land O'Lakes and General Mills? Tim, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. And thanks everyone for participating. It's great to see community happening. So I'm part of our in-house agency at Land O'Lakes, and we function across the enterprise, across our 4 business units. And most of what I do is kind of what you'd expect. So it's helping write and then film or edit video content, for example. And sometimes I'm the producer coordinating freelancers, agencies, and employees. But then when budgets don't exist, which is a decent amount of the time, I'm all of those roles in kind of one person. And then the rest of my work kind of fits in the gaps. So the places between a business issue, a formal strategy, and creativity. So it's things like naming and prototyping. And if you ever need to create a life-size bronze sculpture, give me a call. I can help you with that. But your question about why is content marketing so important? Well, our leadership says that marketing is an engine for growth. So content marketing is a component of our efforts to generate growth.
Excellent. Kevin, General Mills,
Yes.
what is your role and why is content marketing important to GM?
Yeah, thanks again, Paul, for inviting me to be here, and great to see so many familiar names and some faces here too. So yeah, so in my role at General Mills, make it clear off the bat, I work in corporate communications. My role is not in marketing per se, but in the corp comm landscape, I manage a very talented team of folks that are responsible for content strategy, planning, creation, and distribution for our external and our internal channels. So that ranges from our company intranet, our email newsletter to employees, our blog and our website, an external email newsletter, and of course our corporate social media channels. And then we coordinate with our colleagues across Corp Comm who are on the external, internal side on the priority projects and initiatives of our group, but also with people around the company. We work to understand the audience that they're trying to reach, and then decide together, what we're going to do going forward. My team also monitors and tracks analytics for our channels. Recently, we added a team under me that oversees our consumer care analytics for a variety of internal stakeholders too. And I also manage the team that manages our corporate archives, which is fun for me because I'm a huge history buff and support the work that they do to preserve all that the company is doing for the future. As far as why content marketing is important to General Mills, especially today, it starts with trust. There's a fractured media landscape consumers are getting misinformation thrown at them all the time. So we have always put trust and reputation at the heart of our corporate work, providing our stakeholders with the information that that they can trust. And as a business, it's a stronger cadence of storytelling to support the good that we do and the news that we need to share. I often say content is a business asset. So really to demonstrate that we can build that trust, brand awareness, of course, consumer loyalty when we do some things with our many brands. So we strive to do those things that have a positive impact on the business. And certainly over the last 10 years, myself and the teams under me, we've had some great examples of how we've reached the media and our other stakeholders through content marketing.
Kevin, thank you. So Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest, Snapchat, lots and lots of digital platforms and channels. So at General Mills and Land O'Lakes, what are the channels for distribution, et cetera, that are most important to you now, but looking ahead 6 months to 2022, what will be the channels that will be more important to you in your crystal ball? Tim, what channels do you use now and where do you see content channels going?
Yeah, I think the answer is how about all of them? Some more than others, so like General Mills, we're attempting to affect behaviors and grow our share in various food categories. So on the one hand, we're focused on platforms that connect people in food. And in that case, the visual and then kind of intuitive nature of a TikTok and YouTube and Instagram are really obvious platforms for us to continue to explore, and we are. So it's a matter of a lot of test and learn, a lot of kind of trying to figure out what works best, but recognizing that you've got to kind of continue to evolve and grow. So partnerships with influencers and things like that are very important. But let's be honest, more obvious, more close at home platforms like email are still super important for us. And then aside from things like food, we're in animal nutrition, we are in crop inputs, we're in sustainability. And so we're concerned about issues like those, things like carbon credits and rural broadband. And so platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn, which are maybe more verbal, right, than visual, we're interested in those as well. So we're trying to, it's a balance. I wouldn't say any one platform is more important than others for us. It's really a measure of how can each individual platform, again, help us continue to grow as we've defined growth.
Outstanding. Kevin,
I agree.
channels, platforms that are important to you.
Yeah, I agree with Tim. Each channel brings something different to your landscape for content. I think you didn't mention LinkedIn. We spend most of our time there, and I think LinkedIn will continue to be even more important as companies.
Kevin, is that for recruitment? Because everybody thinks of LinkedIn for recruitment, or is LinkedIn a channel for more than recruitment?
It's a little both. So certainly right now, talent retention, talent recruiting, it's the hot topic of the day. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of those things have really made LinkedIn a priority. And I think we also use it for those big corporate initiatives. We use it to highlight the people that work on some of the fun brand projects that we have. And so it's kind of that way in to say, if you work here, you could work on this type of project. But also it's the audience that's on LinkedIn for us. It's the professional audience. It's a platform, quite frankly, that is free for the most part of what you might find on Twitter and Facebook, especially when it comes to the last 4, 5, 6 years. So LinkedIn is huge. I do think that one will continue to grow for a lot of companies, especially for many that folks represent here on the call today. I agree, video is super important. TikTok, many brands are certainly prioritizing that. So I think that will grow for a lot of companies. A lot of our brands at General Mills have kind of dipped their toe into that, but that's a far different audience, of course, than some of the other ones. Instagram, I think, will stay strong. Facebook isn't for everybody, and especially with the scrutiny of late there, I don't know that it will grow in importance over the next 6 months to a year, but we all have our eyes on it. I think it comes down to focusing on the audience of each one and where where you think you can make the best positive difference for your business or brand.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Kevin. Tim, how do you balance when a group at Land O'Lakes says, we want to have more posts that say, buy this butter, as opposed to perhaps more thought leadership or philanthropy or corporate culture? How do, and the satirical tweet feed Adweek just posted today, it was a parody saying Pizza Hut is deciding today to finally post a picture of a pizza that says it's time to buy pizza. How do you balance sales promotion, product driven posts with posts that are not nakedly sales promotional? Starting with you, Tim.
Sure. Well, the truth is they all have to coexist. So on the one hand, we have unlimited pipe, like unlimited distribution, right? And so the real constraint is resources of people and money, right? So we could kind of, if we had unlimited people, we could make unlimited content, and we could distribute it in an unlimited sense. But of course, we've all recognized that like organic posting isn't necessarily all that effective. So then what's your constraint of budget around paid? So, but the point is that all of those messages are important, especially to the people who want to convey them. So someone who's trying to get a thought leadership piece out there, it's really important for them versus someone who's trying to get a strictly promotional message out there. So it's about how do they all coordinate? How in a way, how do we help ensure that the team, the broader team, I think we were talking about balance. It's this idea of internal awareness. So the secret sauce, I think in a lot of this is a culture of sharing. Oh. Hey, do you know, Paul, I haven't seen you in a while. We're working together. Did you know my team is working on X? What is your team working on? And I think ways in which internal marketing teams can help each other understand, oh, yeah, that team's been working on that thing and it's going to go live and it's going to consist of, I wonder how that aligns with what we're doing over here. I mean, because of course, what you're hinting at is we want to avoid conflict. We want to avoid one campaign or one message conflicting with another. And that really boils down to, are you talking to each other, right? So those systems and cultures that allow for marketing teams to communicate with each other and be made aware of, oh, okay, our higher level messaging that gets a lot of money behind it and agency support is X and it's happening here. But what are the other campaigns that we're doing and how do they support each other underneath that? And it's attitude. It's like, we want that to happen. It's culture that says we are making it happen. And then there's tools and processes that enable that to happen. I think that's kind of the long way of answering your question.
And Kevin, before we get to you, Tim, roughly, give or take, how many accounts or platforms with all of its consumer part, ag part, et cetera, how many social channels and platforms is Land O'Lakes currently on? Are we talking 30, 40?
Yeah, it's probably in that space. I mean, so, you've got the dairy business that everyone knows, butter, cheese, and that's both retail, so to consumers, to you and I, and then food service, big part, colleges, universities, K through 12, et cetera. And those channels are increasingly operating in social spaces, chef to chef, or chef to the person who's responsible for purchasing all of the ingredients that go to feed your kids, right? Then you got Purina, and that's all kinds of animals from, we feed most of the zoo animals in America and cows and backyard chickens, et cetera. So there's a ton of audiences there, right? And then you've got the Winfield United business, which is agronomy and crop inputs and services and technology. And we've got Truterra, which is all about, so across all of these, they're all operating in one shape or another in some very public spaces and in some more kind of less obvious channels. But yeah, they're all out there. So it's the bigger challenge is like helping the left hand and the right hand be aware of each other. It's almost like, what's the phrase, marketing the marketing, I think is a big challenge for us. It's in part so that we can, because we all want to be enthusiasts of, oh, cool, I didn't work on that, but those folks are doing this really cool effort over here. I want to evangelize for it. We talked about LinkedIn. I see, a big part of kind of what we try to do internally, and I'm sure Kevin can speak to this. It's like the brands that have a lot of money are not going to have, they're going to get out there, right? They have money, they have resources. People will see it. They don't necessarily need my help. But then there are other initiatives that, quite frankly, don't have a lot of media dollars behind them. And it would be awesome if I could get 50 or 100 fellow Land O'Lake employees to evangelize for that campaign and let people know, right? It's free media. And so you see that happening a lot on LinkedIn. Like, how do we leverage our employees, give them the right thumbnail image, give them the right link, give them the right copy so that they can evangelize on behalf of some of our maybe less resource aided initiatives.
Tim, I'm so glad you brought that up. Kevin, without revealing any proprietary information at General Mills that will get you in trouble, how do you leverage your huge employee base at General Mills to share content, etc.? How do you leverage your employees when it comes to content distribution?
Yeah, I don't actually have to reveal any big secrets, because there was a time when we did have contracts with vendors that were in that employee advocacy space, and this is one that's I'm incredibly passionate about. I for years have really treat this as a channel that can help you advance your goals with content. So the way we do it today is we have over time identified folks who are more inclined to share, or have said I am interested in sharing more of this. So it's grown slowly, but it's, for us right now, it's more of a grassroots effort. And we do we use Microsoft Teams as our platform of choice. So we have ability to get things in front of them there. We send them monthly emails. We highlight when people have shared content, whether it's a blog post that we've done or shared a post on LinkedIn. And it's grassroots, but there is strategy behind it. It's highly organized, managed by my team. And we also work with executives too, and we're making some strides there with really redefining the specific types of things that they can show up. When you talk about thought leadership, there's some strides that you can make, again, from a corporate brand that has a house of brands. In our case, you can make this work. The idea is to never force it on the employees to provide the suggestions. And I think just overall with your content, I think there's a push lately to understand that your choice to put something on your blog, your website, or even a social post, think through more of how could your employees use that. And maybe it's for social, but maybe it's for the conversations that your sales teams have. Maybe it's just conversations that your everyday employees have with their friends and neighbors. So really thinking through that piece of content can be distributed in a variety of ways, and your employees are a key audience for that as well.
Kevin, thank you. And
Paul,
Tim,
let me jump in for a second to
please
follow up on what Kevin said, because so think about this. If you're a salesperson on Purina, or you're out selling Cheerios, right, to someone, this is sort of like what Howard Gossage said, a long time ago about, like, as a salesperson, you want to be able to tell great stories. You want to, when you walk into that client, you don't want them going like, oh, it's this boring person, right? And as a salesperson, it's like, what's your kit of interesting stories? And for Land O'Lakes, I think we walk into a selling situation, and I think of content in terms of how can we enable our salespeople to tell interesting stories, right? So I may be selling calf milk replacer, or I may be selling, bulk cheese or adjuvants, but as part of the process of communication, it's like, hey, by the way, we're doing this really cool recycling thing over in Purina. I'd love to, do you have a second? I want to tell you about it. It's just part of the course of being a salesperson. And so thinking about content as, yes, we're going to distribute it through all the typical channels, but then kind of helping our teams think about, hey, how can this piece also be leveraged by our essential, thinking of sales as almost like a media channel. Like, they need a constant flow of stories that help them. with the chit chat and the intro comments and things like that? How do we enable those folks as they're going out doing their very challenging jobs?
That was outstanding. And if I can put in an endorsement for all the marketers listening in, I think most of you are familiar with the masterclass videos where you get to learn about comedy from Steve Martin and gymnastics from superstars. They have interviews about storytelling, specifically with the author Dan Brown of the Da Vinci Code stories, and hearing how storytellers, novelists, or screenwriters tell their stories is incredibly empowering for people who are dealing with content driven, more commercial content, but content driven. Tim and Kevin, either of you, the content, the format of content, ebooks, cartoons, illustrator videos, white papers, podcasts, and other audio formats. Which formats of content are you most excited about going into 2022? Kevin, let's start with you.
Which do I believe will be done more, and what am I most excited about? I love podcasting. I do it myself, obviously, personally, and we've done it corporately too. Does it mean that every company and brand should have their own podcast? Probably not, and that's a story for another day. But I do think podcasts will increase among the at the corp comm level, the marketing level. So that's one I know people are watching. Tim mentioned it earlier. I think for me, the format is really email. We're fortunate that we launched an email newsletter externally several years back, and I can remember when it was just 200 people subscribing to it, and to be able to grow that into the thousands over the last few years. You have an audience that signs up and says, yes, I do want to hear from you. What news and information do you have? So important today in the era of rented land and what happens with the platforms from time to time when they have some issues. So email newsletters, well, it's kind of getting saturated. Our inboxes are filling up. You can't underestimate that. I do think that will continue to be something that people try. And then we mentioned video as well. I think the bottom line is you have to resist the urge to just throw a bunch of stuff out there. You have to map it to your strategy, and that's where those challenging conversations come into play with your colleagues, with folks around the company. You really have to understand that you only have so much space on your channels. We are not about, we don't need more. Let's be better and be great at the few things that are the most strategic and have the most impact for the business.
Excellent. Tim,
Yeah, I think
formats that excite you.
Well, your audience is going to tell you, right? Like through their absorption, that's the stuff you should focus on. But like Kevin, I agree. Like, I think podcasts are really interesting just in terms of enabling us. I'm out mowing the lawn yesterday and doing some housework, and it's like, I got a podcast and I'm, learning some stuff. And I think that's great, or being entertained. So I think just as the ubiquity, as podcasting just becomes a thing people do more and more and more, like my mom just recently discovered, hey, did you know there's a button on your iPhone and you push it and you can listen to people talking? Like, yes, Mom, podcasting's been around for a while. But, as it becomes more ubiquitous, I think it's going to become more a part of it. The thing about content that, to kind of another way of answering your question, is recognizing that we increasingly have individuals in our company, whether they're subject matter experts or scientists, who have really interesting expertise. And when you think about podcasts, it's like, or TikTok, it's like, book talk or noun, whatever the thing is, talk. Like, there's really narrow areas of expertise that are being celebrated. And I think that we're going to see a bit of an explosion around, like, hey, we've got someone who's just really super knowledgeable about, the gut health of chickens. I'm making it up, right? But that, hey, if there's 1,000 people that are really interested in that, it might be worth making a podcast or making a TikTok channel around that. So I think, like, niche, super smart, expert, narrow content. I think we're going to see brands like ours, like, we don't need that to appeal to like millions of people, but if it can appeal to like a very specific subset of people who will have a outsized impact on growth, then yeah, I think that's an interesting space to kind of either really big or really small in terms of targeting around content.
That's so interesting. Our PR firm does a lot of work in addiction and mental health. And if you have a particular neurological issue, there is a podcast for it. If you're in recovery, as many of us are, there are dozens of in recovery podcasts. And what's exciting for our PR agency's clients is you get 30 to 45 minutes in your own words to tell your message to a very curated audience. So yeah, we're seeing with our clients the same thing. ROI and measurement. So every company is different. You've got click-throughs, you've got downloads, you've got time spent on the content, you've got shares, you've got conversion rates. So Tim and Kevin, how do you measure the success of the content that you and your company are sharing? Kevin, want to start?
Sure. And again, from the CorpCom mindset and the type of content that we're putting out there, yes, we do often talk about, product launches and we, work very closely with the brand teams on, something new is coming out. What I've always struggled with in the 10 plus years I've been here at General Mills is I wish I could say that the person picked that box of Lucky Charms off the shelf based on a blog post they read, but it's impossible to know that really. So we kind of have that anecdote to hope that that's the case, and we view ourselves as supporting that overall effort that the marketing folks would have. It would be great to directly know the sales data versus a piece of content, and there's some ways you can do that obviously, but we like many of the folks on the call, nobody has really solved this. We come close by really honing in on some of those just basic metrics, whether it's blog post page views or internet article page views. We kind of start there, but when it comes to social, it is primarily about engagement for us. We want to know, what are people doing with the content? Certainly we're not seeing the click-throughs when you're sharing links, say, for example, on platforms. So it's it's reach and impressions as well. It's how many people were served this up in their LinkedIn feed, and how many people had the chance to see this, and then what is the engagement on top of that. Those are the things that we primarily look at. And yes, when we were podcasting, the podcast download was the measure for that. But this is tricky from a CorpCom standpoint. It's demonstrating the value is, again, it gets back to building trust. So our reputation team, the work that they do with our reputation partners to understand what impact what does the broader consumer think about General Mills? Well, every little thing that we do is kind of dropping a coin in the piggy bank to get to that overall view of the company, and it's hard to measure. Honestly, it is. But we have the tools in place to just kind of track that, and then we report it out to the partners that we've worked with on the content. We report it out to the teams that are involved. So if it's the sustainability team or if it's our philanthropy folks, right alongside the product brand. So we make sure that we report that back, and we give them some context for this really overperformed, or this was about average, or it was under average. And then you have to figure in, if you did paid, which is most of the time these days, how did that help in terms of that engagement, page views, things like that.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Tim, we've talked off pod about growth being a key metric. Talk about that. How do you measure growth?
Well, it goes back to the brief, right? It goes back to the conversations that we as a team have had originally, and hopefully in defining our strategy, we've had a conversation around how will we know, right? How will we know if it works, right? That an effective strategy includes that kind of conversation. So, if that's product flying off the shelf, or if that's signups for a newsletter, or if that's click-throughs, okay. I mean, but I think it boils down to the team has to have a conversation around all of the factors, which include, okay, we've agreed that growth equals X, and we've defined X.
That's great. So let's jump to something that is benefits and pitfalls, which is user-generated content. You didn't write it, you didn't shoot it, but
Yeah.
it's about your company, it's about your product. Either of you, Kevin or Tim,
Yeah.
do you encourage user-generated content? And is there a danger in it? And how do you deal with those risks? Tim or Kevin?
Well, okay, so I don't think it's good or bad, right? It sort of it depends on what's your strategy, you know, and you may have figured out a strategy that says if our audience, I don't like the term users, but if our audience prefers to see themselves addressing this, it's more effective, then great, right? So audience generated content. But remember, you know, what there used to be that building on Lindale, and it said art changes everything, right? And that you might get more art from your audience maybe than you bargained for. We've certainly seen examples of that. So, you know, the pitfalls of audience generated content are they don't hit the mark, right? The reason you pay an agency, the reason you pay people to do stuff is there's a guarantee that they're going to follow a brief and they're going to make what you want, versus when you bring the audience in, you're opening up for them to interpret as they see fit. That's kind of the point. But sometimes you get really lucky, right? And you get something fresh and you get something unexpected, and then your audience elevates your brand. So, you know, just be forewarned, but plan for it.
Thank you. Kevin, before we get to you, if anyone wishes to ask questions in the chat box for Tim and Kevin, please do now, and we'll make sure that they answer your questions to the best of what they want to say. Kevin, user-generated content, I know that you're in corp comm as opposed to marketing, but does General Mills want to see user-generated videos of people enjoying Cheerios? Is that a strategy or not?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's all about food, right? All about making food that people love, and it just happens a lot, just organically, which we're proud that it does. And I would just say we have encouraged it from time to time with some of the initiatives that we do. National Cereal Day comes every March, and we'd love to have some fun with that and really encourage people to celebrate cereal. But we see that all year round, so that's just one example. And we've done some things with the Halloween season with our monster cereals. You know, there's so much passion for brands like that we corporately we can support. It's trickier when it gets to just General Mills overall. We have done some work with to Tim's point, with farmers and things like that in the past as well. But a lot of it just happens, and we love to see it. We absolutely do, and we'd love to highlight it, especially on Instagram, and kind of do a monthly recap of some of the best stuff that we've seen, and we think that encourages it. We don't see as much of the negative, thankfully, that potentially we could. Certainly, it's out there. But,
oh, that's so interesting. So
yeah.
General Mills actually anthologizes or curates user-generated content about your products and your company, and then shares it from the company's platforms.
Yeah, we will repost, say on Instagram, if there's a particularly great photo that we liked, or we'll put a compilation of them in an Instagram story, just to kind of highlight, you know, again, it is about the food, and we want people to understand that we're this house of brands. So it could be, you know, 7 different photos and 7 different products. It's a great way for us to show that.
Oh, marvelous. We have a question from Christine Sherping of our own PR agency. Christine asks, beside the brands that you work for and represent, are there any other brands or companies that you think are doing well in the content marketing space? Someone that you admire for what they're doing in content? Tim? Oh, Tim, are you muted?
I'm on mute, right?
There you go. Who do you admire?
So I'm a drummer, and I am also doing a lot of home renovation stuff. So the brands that I'm thinking about are the ones that are in those spaces. And from a content standpoint, you know, in a music space, I'm interested in brands that are gonna, you know, a lot of the drum companies are great at saying like, hey, here's a drummer doing something awesome with our equipment. And I will watch all of it all the way through multiple times. So like in that space, it's partly instructional. It's partly just like a love of the art and things like that. So I think there's a lot of music brands that have recognized like, hey, get some talented people to use the equipment, and that's engagement for them. On the like the home kind of repair front, again, it goes back to things which are useful. It's like how do I go about I'm stripping an oak countertop, and it's like, I'm not a woodworker, but thank you, YouTube. I've learned a lot. And now, of course, my social feed is filling with, because the devices are listening. Of course they are. And, so like all of a sudden content is showing up. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that's how you work with oak, so I don't know. I tend to look at things that I'm seeing, in the bigger brand spaces. I think General Mills is doing a great job with stuff, but I'm not currently, like this week, not actively out looking at other examples of things.
Kevin, what do you think about Land O'Lakes content marketing?
Right back at you, Tim.
Yeah.
No, yeah, they've done.
Who do you admire? Who do you
Land
admire?
O'Lakes has done a tremendous job over the last few years with highlighting farmers, and it's certainly been something that we've had our eyes on as well. So congrats to you on those pieces of content. I think selfishly, on the fun side, I love the fact that now all our favorite music artists can get back on the road and they're having concerts. I think it'd be a blast to work for somebody like Country Music's Eric Church, and just to follow that tour from town to town and push that content out to fans. I think that's an example of something really fun to an highly engaged audience. Especially on the sports side as well. I'm a big NBA fan. I think there are some things that each of the teams do. Even our woeful Minnesota Timberwolves here in town, really great video content on their YouTube channel. I think it's a waste if you don't do that stuff. You have to cover yourself, and I love that they're making those efforts to put their talent to work. So I really admire that. Target is always one that we look at. Especially across their corporate portfolio, whether it's their investor relations team or what they do with sustainability, really some examples for us to kind of steal there. And then my friend Chad Mitchell used to be at Walmart, now he's at TD Bank. They recently, within the last year, launched TD Bank Stories, a new kind of place on their website for more of that traditional corporate storytelling, and a unique way to push that out there. And it gets back to that theme we talked about. Put it out there, but then also empower your employees to know that this is out there, and it helps inform those decisions. So TD Bank is one that I
Thank you, Kevin. We've got another question, and we have about 5 more minutes to go. This question is from Karina Wiatros, who is a alum of the Maccabee PR agency. She goes back to user-generated content and says, Kevin or Tim, what are your thoughts on encouraging users to participate, given the risk that nobody will participate? How do you deal with saying, yes, do user-generated content, and then all you get are crickets? How do you deal with that? Or how do you prevent that from happening?
Well, I think to just jump in, audience-generated content isn't necessarily a strategy in and of itself, right? It's a component of a whole plan. And I don't think you would jump into embracing that space, unless you had a pretty good sense that it was going to work, right? That you recognized our audience prefers to hear from themselves talking about this topic or issue rather than us as the brand directly talking about it. So you would have had some insight that audience generated content was going to be more effective, right? Some proof that was the right path to go down. And maybe you did some prototyping and proofed it out, right? So, to just assume that you're going to just, we'll just do this and then hope for the best is probably the wrong way to go about it. I think you'd want to make sure that as a tactic, you had some evidence that approach was going to be effective. And kind of like what Kevin was talking about earlier, it's like at General Mills, they've identified people who they know, if we give you the thing, you will go do something with it. You'll go do a very specific thing with it. So, it's less of this, spray and pray approach and more about like, we know this is going to work. We know why it's going to work. And we know specifically with whom it's going to work.
Kevin, do you want to add anything about ensuring that if you throw a contest or simply invite user-generated content, that you will receive user-generated content?
Yeah, just a quick add to that. People will always ask, what's in it for me? So you have to think through incentivizing that in some way. And it might mean it's a quick little drawing for something depending on the size of your company, brand, or organization, you might have to understand that you don't want to get stuck with 2 entries in your effort there, especially on Instagram or something like that. So think through something. The user will always ask, well, what do I get for doing this?
Right.
So think through that.
And I would add, because Kevin is hinting at something, which is like size of audience really matters. Like if this is a niche, very B2B thing, UGC is probably not going to work. Like the reason it works is when you have giant scale. So, fast food and large consumer brands, there's just a much larger pool of people. And so the likelihood that they're going to engage in stuff is just more likely. So, as a tactic, it works at scale in my sense. And I think also, because then those products tend to be more universal. Like we're not going to do a user-generated product around, some really niche product in agriculture, because the audience is maybe 10,000 people versus, butter. Okay, we're talking about millions upon millions of people. So I think the size of audience, and then to recognize that like it ain't free. When you start to go create this stuff, you need resources, you need people, you need money, you need organic, and you need some paid stuff. You probably likely have some influencers out there seeding things. So, I think we've learned enough from what was it? It started a decade ago, the whole UGC space, and it's evolved enough to know, like, you get into it when you have a big enough audience and you have enough resources to help nurture and prove that it's going to work.
Our last 2 minutes, we'll do a speed round. Influencers. What role I know General Mills, but I believe both General Mills and Land O'Lakes work with paid or sponsored influencers. What role do influencers play in the content marketing scheme of things? Either of you to answer. Influencers, how do you intersect with them?
I think it's the audience that they bring. I'll just a quick answer there that you're tapping into them for the audience that they have. We recently did something with registered dietitians as it related to cereal. So that's when we found an ability to do that.
Yeah, I think for us that, that whoever the influencer is, the key ingredient is alignment. Like essentially we're all making the same movie, right? We work with chefs in the food business, but we also work with agronomists, and we work with, talented riders, in rodeo riders who are in the horse nutrition business. So getting on the same page, as Kevin said, they have their audience and they have their agenda. Let's make sure that there's a solid understanding and overlap around what our agenda is. Why are we partnering?
Outstanding. One last question for both of you to answer. And thank you. You guys have been amazing. What is the biggest mistake that content marketers should avoid doing? What's the biggest mistake you can make in content marketing, Tim or Kevin?
Trying to be everywhere, trying to do too much. I think we're still seeing so much of that.
Kevin, what do you mean when you say trying to be everywhere, trying to be too much?
Yeah, I think you're trying to be on 6 different platforms. You feel like you have to be on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and in reality, get good at 1 or 2 of those things. Have a really good blog, have a really good email newsletter. Especially if you're just starting a program, I think really start slow and prove the concept. And then as you go, the other mistake I see a lot is just not understanding the audience on each platform is different. You really got to keep the audience front and center.
Tim.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake you can make is jumping to tactics. Like you have to start with a clear and compelling strategy. You have to understand, why are we making this marketing and who are we making it for, and kind of what's the behavior we're trying to affect. If you don't have those things, that's the biggest mistake.
Thank you, Tim. And that brings us to the end of our Sharper Angle event, brought to you by Maccabee Public Relations in Minneapolis. Thanks to everybody who listened in today, and really warm special thanks to our panelists, Kevin and Tim from General Mills and Land O'Lakes. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Stay safe.